The royal family believed their deepest secrets were buried with Queen Elizabeth herself. But when Lady Louise unexpectedly steps into the spotlight and unveils a hidden diary belonging to the late monarch, the palace is thrown into chaos. What truths could be so dangerous that they were locked away from the world? What revelations could be so powerful that they shake the monarchy to its very core? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, the revelation felt like something ripped straight from fiction. A granddaughter pulling back the curtain on the life of a woman whose reign defined an era. For decades, Queen Elizabeth was the symbol of unwavering duty. A figure who never faltered in public, never allowed emotion to overshadow the weight of the crown. Yet, here was Lady Louise, quiet and often overlooked by the public eye, holding in her hands something that threatened to dismantle the carefully built image of an unshakable monarch. Within minutes of the announcement, the air in Windsor grew heavy. Members of the royal family who had grown accustomed to controlling the narrative were suddenly caught off guard, scrambling for answers. Why would Louise, of all people, step forward? Why now? The questions burned hotter with every passing moment, igniting speculation across the Commonwealth and beyond. The media storm was instant and unforgiving. Headlines blazed with words like betrayal, secrets, and forbidden love. Cameras swarmed the palace gates, desperate to catch a glimpse of the young woman whose name had just become synonymous with defiance. To the public, this was more than a scandal. It was a once unimaginable unveiling of the Queen's private soul. And to those within the family, it felt like a dagger piercing their carefully preserved facade. The tension inside the royal household was palpable. Some whispered that Louise's actions were nothing short of treachery, a betrayal that could never be forgiven. Others feared what the diary might contain, knowing that the late Queen's thoughts, once hidden from the world, could unravel everything they had fought to protect. Could it reveal regrets about her reign? Could it expose truths about the people closest to her? Or worse, could it ignite divisions that would tear the monarchy apart from within? Whispers spread through every corner of the palace, through the halls, the private chambers, and even the kitchens. It was as if the ghost of Elizabeth herself had returned, not through her presence, but through the ink of her words. And the most haunting question lingered over them all. If the Queen had hidden this diary away, what was she so desperate to keep buried? For Lady Louise, there was no turning back. By stepping forward, she had already placed herself in the eye of a storm she could not control. What she revealed would be scrutinized, dissected, and debated across every media outlet, every living room, and every hall of power. She had broken the silence, and in doing so, she had broken the illusion of control that the monarchy clung to so tightly. But the real storm was only beginning, because the first pages of the diary carried a truth no one in the palace dared whisper aloud. While the world gasped, whispers spread of how Lady Louise came into possession of the diary. This wasn't an accident. In the quiet corridors of Windsor, she had stumbled upon something hidden so carefully, it was almost as if the late Queen herself wanted her to find it. For years, Lady Louise had been the quiet observer, the royal who blended into the background while her cousins commanded the spotlight. She had no hunger for headlines, no ambition to step into the turbulent world of royal politics. And perhaps that was exactly why fate, or perhaps design, led her to this discovery. In the stillness of Windsor's private chambers, where echoes of history lingered like shadows, Louise unearthed a chest tucked away beneath layers of dust and secrecy. Inside was no ordinary collection of trinkets or letters, but the very diary Queen Elizabeth had written in moments of solitude. At first, the sight of it was disarming. Bound in leather, its edges worn, it carried an aura of reverence and danger all at once. Louise ran her fingers across the surface and noticed strange markings, symbols, and initials, etched faintly into the cover, almost as if the Queen had left a code only for her descendants to decipher. It wasn't merely a diary. It was a vault of thoughts, guarded by deliberate secrecy. And buried within its pages were words that the Queen herself had never intended the public to see. As she turned the pages, her breath caught at the sight of the handwriting, familiar, regal, but intimate in a way the world had never known. Among the careful cursive were passages that began with a chilling address, "To my bloodline." These words weren't directed to the nation, to history books, or even to her children. They were meant for those who would come after her, those who bore her legacy in their veins. It was as though the queen had foreseen a moment when silence could no longer protect the crown, and she had chosen her blood as the vessel for truth. But what stunned Louise most wasn't the existence of the diary. It was the realization of what to do with it. Her heart weighed heavily with conflict. On one hand, she was bound by loyalty to her family, a duty to protect the institution that had given her everything. On the other, she felt the raw pull of honesty, a demand that the words of her grandmother should not die hidden in shadows. Could she remain silent, knowing she held the queen's unvarnished truth? Or would she risk all her standing, her family's trust, even her place within the monarchy itself by unveiling the diary to the world? This was no careless act. It was a decision forged in sleepless nights and silent reflection. Louise understood the risks better than anyone. She knew her revelation would fracture the palace, fuel the press, and brand her forever as either a traitor or a heroine. Yet in the end, the pull of destiny was too strong. It was as if the queen herself had whispered across time, "When the moment comes, reveal this." And so Lady Louise stepped into a storm she could never escape, her choice setting into motion a chain of events that would tear open the monarchy's most carefully guarded secrets. As the palace scrambled to contain the shock, the content of those pages began to spill, and with it, the weight of buried confessions. The diary revealed not just royal history, but raw, unfiltered pain. Queen Elizabeth's words dripped with sorrow, guilt, and regret. For the first time, the world glimpsed the private doubts of a woman who was seen as unshakable. Her entries painted a haunting portrait of a queen torn between two worlds: the sovereign who had to embody strength, and the mother who often felt she had failed her own children. She confessed to the silent torment of balancing duty and love, describing moments when the weight of the crown pressed so heavily on her that she could barely breathe. Every public smile, every carefully measured word, had come at the cost of countless stolen hours from her family. In the ink of those pages, the queen admitted the agony of watching her children grow up from afar, raised as much by nannies and tutors as by their own mother. Her reflections on marriage carried the same thread of sacrifice. She wrote of loyalty to a man who stood beside her through storms, but not without fractures. There were hints of loneliness, of emotional distances she could never fully bridge. She admitted that sometimes the throne stood between them, casting shadows on the bond they once shared. For a monarch who had never allowed the world to see cracks in her crown, these passages revealed the woman who longed, if only for a moment, to put down the oppression, the burden of state, and simply live as a wife, as a partner, as someone free from the chains of expectation. But alongside these intimate regrets lay her greatest fear: the survival of the monarchy itself. Elizabeth admitted to nights of sleeplessness, where she questioned if the institution she had protected so fiercely could endure the shifting tides of modern times. She saw the whispers of discontent in her people, the growing skepticism of younger generations, and the scandals that threatened to erode faith in the crown. Her diary became a mirror of her anxieties, showing a monarch terrified not of death, but of being remembered as the last ruler to hold the monarchy intact. More than once, she confessed to strained ties with her own children. Words filled with disappointment and sorrow revealed how distance, duty, and stubborn pride had carved deep divides. She expressed anguish at misunderstandings with Charles, sadness over missed moments with Anne, and regret that her dedication to the throne had left wounds within her own family. For Elizabeth, the greatest tragedy was not what she had endured for the nation, but what she had lost within her own bloodline. Perhaps most heartbreaking of all was her quiet longing for a private life she never had. In those pages, the Queen admitted dreaming of anonymity, of walking through streets unrecognized, of sitting by the sea without escorts, of being free to speak her mind without headlines erupting the next day. It was the dream of a woman caged by her own destiny, a queen who yearned to taste the ordinary life denied to her by birth and by duty. As Lady Louise read these passages aloud, her voice trembled. She could not hide the tears welling in her eyes, for in those words, she saw not only the confessions of a monarch, but the cries of a grandmother who had carried the weight of the world in silence. The diary was not a relic, it was a wound reopened, bleeding with every sentence spoken. But regret was only the beginning. Soon, accusations and forbidden truths emerged from the ink. The next section of the diary didn't just expose emotions, it revealed betrayals the monarchy hoped would never see daylight. Affairs, rivalries, and long-hidden disputes surfaced like ghosts demanding justice. The words on the page grew darker, sharper, as if the queen herself had struggled to contain the weight of what she was writing. Here, she did not speak of regrets or longing. She wrote of wounds inflicted by those closest to her, wounds buried beneath layers of ceremony and silence. In chilling clarity, Elizabeth admitted to betrayals inside her own household, breaches of loyalty that struck at the very heart of the crown. She wrote of alliances formed in the shadows, of whispered promises that undermined her authority, of family members who placed ambition above blood. These were not the speculations of the press, nor the gossip of outsiders. They were the Queen's own words, carved in ink, undeniable and irreversible. Most shocking of all were her references to a so-called shadow council. Hidden behind palace walls, this clandestine circle had, according to her diary, attempted to sway decisions, to manipulate outcomes in favor of their chosen vision for the monarchy's future. Elizabeth's words revealed her horror at discovering that even within her reign, forces moved independently of her will. She described it as a betrayal of trust so profound that it threatened to unravel the very foundation of monarchy. And yet, she had been forced to tolerate their existence, for exposing them might have shattered the institution she was sworn to protect. There were allegations scattered throughout these pages that struck like lightning. Hints of corruption. Favors exchanged for silence. Stories of individuals whose voices had been carefully erased from history, their influence wiped clean to protect the crown's pristine image. The Queen admitted her complicity, her guilt in allowing some truths to remain hidden, not out of malice, but out of desperation to preserve the monarchy's fragile stability. Still, the pain of these decisions burned through her words, leaving no doubt that even her iron will had cracked under the weight of compromise. What made the revelations even more staggering was the way they pointed inward. Elizabeth's notes hinted at fractured alliances among her own children and grandchildren, tensions that the public never saw. She described whispered conversations that cut through family dinners like knives, secret deals struck behind closed doors, and a growing sense that the family name was no longer united but splintering into factions. The monarchy, she feared, had become a house-divided one that could collapse from within if these rifts widened further. And then came the most haunting detail of all, the acknowledgement of those who had been silenced to protect the institution. Names were left unwritten, but the stories were clear. Individuals who had once stood too close to the truth had simply disappeared from public view, erased from memory, sacrificed so that the crown could remain untarnished. The Queen's guilt bled through these passages, her sorrow heavy, as she admitted that justice had been denied for the sake of legacy. When Lady Louise read these words aloud, the room itself seemed to grow colder. The family, long accustomed to keeping secrets, was stunned into silence. To hear the Queen herself confirm what they had always denied was unbearable. And for Louise to be the one revealing it, a young woman once dismissed as irrelevant, made the sting even sharper. Her courage, or recklessness, broke through decades of silence in a single breath. But even these scandals couldn't prepare the nation for what came next. The Queen's private thoughts on her heirs. Buried within the diary was Queen Elizabeth's unfiltered view of her son, Charles. What she wrote was not the careful tone of speeches, it was the voice of a mother torn between love, disappointment, and fear for the crown's future. For decades, the world saw Charles as the inevitable heir, the man who had waited longer than any other royal in history to wear the crown. But the Queen's private reflections told a different story, one that revealed her profound unease. She admitted, with brutal honesty, that she had doubted her son's readiness to rule. His sensitivity, his indecision, and his need for validation weighed heavily on her. In her eyes, he was a man capable of charm, but also of hesitation, a prince whose destiny might outpace his strength. Her words carried a mixture of maternal pain and sovereign foresight. She wrote candidly about his weaknesses, noting moments when his personal desires seemed to cloud his public responsibilities. She feared that Charles, though intelligent and dutiful, sometimes lacked the resolve to stand firm against those who sought to manipulate him. The Queen's tone was not cruel but sorrowful, as though she knew the truth and yet longed for it to be different. Perhaps most striking were her confessions about Camilla. She admitted her deep concern over the influence this woman held over her son. The Queen acknowledged that love had bound them, but she also hinted at a dangerous imbalance that Charles, in his devotion, could be swayed too easily, placing personal affection above the institution he was meant to safeguard. To Elizabeth, the monarchy was never about one's happiness, but about survival, stability, and sacrifice. In her diary, she questioned whether Charles could truly separate his heart from his crown. Hidden among the pages was a revelation that stunned even the most hardened critics of the monarchy. There were notes, carefully written and never intended for the public, suggesting that the Queen had once considered bypassing Charles altogether. In her darkest hours of doubt, she weighed the possibility of allowing the line of succession to move directly to William, sparing the monarchy from what she feared could be a troubled reign. It was not a decision she acted upon, but the very fact that she had thought it, written it, and preserved it in ink was enough to shake the foundations of trust, and woven into these entries was her grief over Diana. The Queen spoke of the tragedy with searing regret, acknowledging how it had shaped Charles, scarred William and Harry, and fractured the monarchy's bond with the people. She feared that Diana's ghost would forever shadow Charles's reign, that the public would never forgive, never forget. Her words revealed a monarch haunted by the past, fearing that the future she had spent her life protecting would be consumed by unresolved sorrow. When these passages were read aloud, the monarchy itself trembled. They were not the musings of critics or commentators, but the private judgment of the Queen herself. For Charles, it was both a crown and a curse validation that he had always been seen as imperfect, yet destined, nonetheless, to rule. And yet, even her thoughts on Charles paled in comparison to the shocking words she reserved for William and Harry. The Queen's hidden diary revealed her heartbreak over her grandsons, a split she foresaw long before the world did. Her words not only predicted the feud between William and Harry, but suggested she had considered a plan to reshape succession itself. Elizabeth's entries about Harry carried a painful tenderness. She described his restless spirit, his constant battle with identity, and the feeling that he never truly belonged within palace walls. Her words revealed a grandmother who saw his anguish long before the headlines did. A boy overshadowed by duty, weighed down by expectation, and forever caught in the shadow of his elder brother. She wrote of his longing for freedom, his search for purpose beyond tradition, and the silent despair she recognized but could not heal. The Queen admitted that her heart broke watching him slip further away from the institution he was born into, powerless to stop the distance growing between Harry and the crown. In contrast, her passages about William were steeped in pride but laced with worry. She called him strong, steadfast, a man molded by responsibility. Yet beneath her admiration was a deep concern for the crushing burdens he carried. She acknowledged that William's devotion to the monarchy came at the cost of his peace, and she wondered if the crown might ultimately break him. In her eyes, he embodied stability, but at a price few could endure. And then came the sentence that sent shockwaves through those who heard it. She described William as the monarchy's last true hope. These words did not merely elevate him, they foreshadowed the possibility of an institution clinging desperately to a single heir's shoulders. But what haunted the pages most was her regret. Elizabeth confessed that she had not done enough to heal the divide between her grandsons. She admitted to silence when action was needed, to restraint when love demanded intervention. The diary revealed her sorrow that William and Harry's bond, once unbreakable, was fraying even during her reign. She foresaw that their rift would one day become the monarchy's greatest weakness, a wound visible not just to the family, but to the entire world. Amid these reflections was a chilling note that left readers stunned. The Queen mentioned a decision left to Anne. No explanation followed, only a cryptic line that suggested her daughter would one day hold a responsibility linked to the succession itself. The ambiguity of those words ignited speculation. Had the Queen entrusted Anne with a hidden duty, perhaps even the power to decide the future of the throne, should William or Harry falter? The mystery lingered like smoke, thick and impossible to ignore. As Lady Louise read these passages aloud, her voice trembled. The weight of her grandmother's anguish, the rawness of her foresight, and the sheer gravity of her words were almost too much to carry. The room grew heavy with silence, every ear straining to absorb the revelations that shattered the polished image of royal unity. But the diary's greatest revelation was not about kings or heirs. It was about a secret legacy only Louise herself could carry forward. As the world speculated, one entry silenced the noise. The Queen had written directly to Lady Louise years before her passing. It was as if she had chosen her, above all others, to carry a hidden truth into the future. In carefully measured words, Elizabeth addressed her youngest granddaughter in a tone that was both regal and intimate. She called Louise her silent strength, a title no one else in the family had ever received. It was a name that carried both affection and responsibility, suggesting that the Queen had always seen something in Louise that the world, and perhaps even her family, had overlooked. While the others were consumed by duty, power, or rebellion, Louise had remained quietly in the background, untainted by ambition, her silence becoming her shield. The Queen's instructions were simple, yet thunderous in their implications. Louise was not to fear the truth. She was told that when the moment arrived, when silence was no longer enough to protect the monarchy, she was to speak boldly, regardless of who stood against her. The diary revealed this in Elizabeth's own hand, a call to courage, written not as a monarch addressing her people, but as a grandmother preparing her granddaughter for a destiny far larger than herself. These passages hinted at a legacy that stretched beyond crowns, titles, or bloodlines. The Queen wrote of values that had guided her reign of integrity, sacrifice, loyalty to truth, and she urged Louise to guard these above all else. It was not jewels or estates she left for her. It was something far more dangerous and far more powerful, the command to unveil what others had buried, to bring light where others demanded darkness. Elizabeth's reasoning for choosing Louise became chillingly clear. She described her granddaughter as unwatched. While William and Harry were scrutinized, while Charles was bound by expectation, and while others carried the weight of public duty, Louise had been left in relative obscurity. To the Queen, that invisibility was her greatest strength. It gave her freedom. It gave her the ability to act without the suffocating eyes of the world pressing down. And in that quiet space, Elizabeth saw the one person who could carry forward what she herself could not risk revealing while alive. The words that followed were the most haunting of all. "When the time comes, reveal this." It was not a suggestion. It was a command, an echo of inevitability. The Queen had not left the diary by accident, nor had it fallen into Louise's hands by chance. Every moment, every page, had been crafted with intention. It was as if Elizabeth had orchestrated her granddaughter's role from beyond the grave, ensuring that her voice would rise through Louise when the monarchy needed its reckoning most. As Lady Louise reached the end of this entry, realization washed over her. The diary was not just history. It was not even just a confession. It was her inheritance, her burden, her calling. She was the chosen one not to rule, not to wear a crown, but to speak the truths the monarchy had buried for too long. The diary had waited in silence. Now it demanded to be heard. But the world wasn't ready for the final chapter, the one that questioned the very survival of the monarchy itself. The final entries carried an ominous tone. Queen Elizabeth foresaw storms greater than scandals or feuds. She foresaw a reckoning, a moment where the monarchy would stand on the edge of collapse, and she placed the burden on the shoulders of a generation not yet ready. Her words shifted from confession to prophecy. She no longer dwelled on the pains of the past, but instead cast her gaze into a future that seemed more fragile than anyone dared admit. Elizabeth wrote of instability within the monarchy itself, predicting fractures that would widen beyond repair. She foresaw divisions not only between family members, but between the crown and the people, a disconnect that no ceremony or tradition could mend. It was as though she had looked past her reign and seen a kingdom standing on the brink of disintegration. One warning repeated itself like a refrain: the death of public faith. Elizabeth knew the monarchy survived not on power or wealth, but on the loyalty of its people. Without their belief, the crown was nothing more than gold and velvet resting on a hollow throne. She predicted a future where scandals would no longer be dismissed as human flaws, but would ignite outrage so fierce that the monarchy's very existence would be questioned. The weight of these words was devastating, because they came from the one figure who had embodied stability for 70 years. If she doubted the institution's endurance, what hope was left? Amid these dire warnings came her most urgent plea: the crown must evolve or perish. The Queen admitted that tradition alone could not carry the monarchy into the new age. She foresaw a time when clinging to old ways would transform reverence into resentment. Her command was not a gentle suggestion but a desperate cry, urging those who followed her to adapt, to modernize, to embrace transparency before the people turned away forever. Yet in her tone, there was little faith that her warning would be heeded. Her acknowledgement of the throne's fragility was perhaps the most shattering revelation of all. Elizabeth had spent her life presenting the monarchy as timeless, unshakable, eternal. And yet, in her private writings, she admitted what she never could in public, that the throne was not invincible. It was delicate, vulnerable, and only as strong as the unity and integrity of those who guarded it. To hear the Queen describe her own crown in such terms was to witness the breaking of a myth, the unraveling of an illusion carefully upheld for generations. The final line she left behind was one that would haunt both her family and her nation: "The end begins with silence." It was a phrase heavy with meaning, a warning that ignoring the truth, suppressing voices, and burying reality would not protect the monarchy, but destroy it from within. Silence, she declared, would be the monarchy's undoing. When Lady Louise read these chilling words aloud, the world was shaken. They did not sound like musings, they sounded like prophecy. They carried the echo of a queen who had lived through wars, crises, and betrayals, and who knew the signs of collapse when she saw them. For the family, it was unbearable. For the nation, it was unforgettable. And so, Lady Louise's revelation did not just uncover a diary, it opened a wound the monarchy may never heal. The Queen's hidden diary had escaped the grave and entered the world. For the royals, nothing would ever be the same. For Lady Louise, she was no longer the quiet granddaughter but the young woman who tore open the palace's most dangerous secrets. The palace reacted with panic. Every corridor buzzed with urgency, every official scrambled to control the narrative. Press offices worked around the clock, releasing carefully worded statements designed to downplay the revelations, to paint the diary as nothing more than a collection of personal reflections. Yet the harder they tried to suppress the storm, the louder it grew. The Queen's words had already taken flight, spreading beyond their control, and the attempt to silence them only confirmed the suspicion that there was more truth inside those pages than the monarchy could ever admit. Within the family, lines were drawn. Some regarded Louise with disdain, branding her a betrayer who had humiliated her own bloodline. Others, though silent in public, quietly admired her bravery. Whispers of admiration spread through the younger generation of royals, who saw in her act a defiance they themselves longed for, but dared not embrace. The divisions became sharper than ever, revealing a family torn between loyalty to image and loyalty to truth. The outside world responded differently. The public, weary of half-truths and polished facades, rallied behind Louise. Crowds praised her courage, seeing her not as a rebel but as the only royal willing to let the people see the monarchy without its mask. Social media turned her into an icon, a symbol of transparency in a dynasty built on secrecy. Where the palace sought to diminish her, the people elevated her, creating a tidal wave of support that even global leaders could not ignore. For Charles and William, the pressure was unbearable. Both were forced into damage control, appearing before cameras with somber expressions, attempting to calm the storm. Their words, however, rang hollow against the power of the Queen's confessions. No reassurance could erase the diary's warnings. No public statement could wash away the shadows Elizabeth herself had cast over their reigns. The heir and the monarch stood not as pillars of strength, but as men forced to answer questions written by a woman who ruled before them. Internationally, the fallout was immense. The diary became more than a family scandal. It became a global phenomenon. Analysts, historians, and journalists dissected every line, debating its implications, questioning whether the monarchy could withstand the weight of its own truth. Countries where the Queen had once been revered began to reconsider their allegiance to the crown, their loyalty shaken by the fragility exposed in her words. The monarchy was not only under scrutiny, it was under siege. And yet, beneath the chaos, one truth remained undeniable. Elizabeth's final words had left an indelible mark. The monarchy would forever be remembered not only for her reign of endurance, but for the revelations she carried in silence until death. Her diary was not just a record of regrets, it was a mirror held up to the crown, forcing it to confront its own fragility in a way no scandal, no crisis ever had before. And as the echoes of her revelation ripple across history, one question lingers. Was this Queen Elizabeth's final act of control, reaching from beyond the grave? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.